The Gellerfeld screams. It is not a mechanical noise, a quantifiable siren of distress. It is a sound of pure metaphysical violation, the sound of 1 billion tormented souls pressing against a fragile bubble of reality, a wail of tortured physics. On the bridge of the Imperial cruiser Righteous Fury, the adamantium-plated bulkheads groan, the lights gutter, plunging the world into a flickering blood-red emergency glow. Vox static shrieks, a cacophony of 1,000 contradictory reports, flooding the channel, each one laced with the rising panic of unseen terrors. But they are all drowned by the other sound. The sound from outside. Claws the size of forgotten continents scraping against the hull. Laughter that echoes not in the ears, but in the marrow of the bone. A cold, sharp mirth that promises eternal agony. In his shielded sanctum, a cold brass and iron womb suspended in a gimbal of anointed steel. Navigator Primus Patroclus gasps, his emaciated body arching in a spasm of pure psychic agony. The third eye on his forehead, a grotesque mutation that is his divine blessing, and his eternal curse is stretched wide, weeping tears of bloody fluid as it stares unblinking into the roiling, incandescent madness of the Empyrean, the Immaterium, the Warp. It is not space. It is a sea of raw, unbridled emotion, a tempest of nightmares given conscious form, a realm where gods of cancer and decay are born from a translation. The astropath shrieked his own voice, dissolving into psychic feedback, his frail body collapsing as his mind was torn apart by the message. Patroclus tries to speak to give the order to the helm, but his mouth fills with the taste of ash and old pennies. He sees them, the things that swim in the psychic tide. Faces of his ancestors, their features melting like wax, their mouths open in silent screams. Arms of pure shadow beckoning him into the storm, promising him release, promising him knowledge. He can feel the ship's ancient machine spirit groaning its holy mechanisms, strained to the breaking point by the sheer impossibility of the dimension it is forced to endure. This is not navigation. This is controlled drowning. This is a desperate, blindfolded sprint through a minefield. The Fury lurches a colossal metal coffin tossed like a child's toy by waves of undiluted rage, guided only by the distant psychic beacon of a long-dead enthroned emperor. A beacon that shines like a lighthouse, yes, a single point of sanity in the madness. But it is also a bonfire that attracts the moths of hell, a blazing signal to every predator in this psychic ocean that food is passing by. Every single journey is a roll of the dice with damnation as the stakes. Every arrival is a miracle paid for in blood terror and the desperate soul-crushing erosion of faith. This is the cost of empire. This is the price of holding the void at bay. This is travel for the Imperium of man. Now, erase that image of torment. Banish it. Picture instead an ocean of absolute stillness. Not the black, cold vacuum of real space, but a structured dimensional corridor, a subrealm tucked between the folds of reality. It is a tunnel woven from solidified light from singing psychoactive crystal that resonates with the movement of its occupants, shifting its own light in harmonious patterns. A vessel moves here. It is not a brute force steel box, bristling with macro cannons and armored in faith. It is a sliver of wraithbone grown, not built elegant as a hunting shark, its vast solar sail unfurled, not to catch a star's light, but the subtle, gentle psychic currents that flow through this impossible place. The craft is named Star Shimmer. Inside, there are no screaming priests, no terrified crewmen lashed to their stations, no navigators weeping blood. There are Eldari, tall, impossibly graceful, their minds sharp enough to cut a diamond, their emotions a deep, controlled, powerful river. An Autarch stands at the prow, her enameled armor gleaming, her eyes closed, not in prayer, but in communion. She feels the path ahead. She senses the myriad branching tunnels, the thousands of destinations as clearly as a man sees the street thought, a gentle psychic nudge, a pull on the song of the craft's own spirit. The vessel responds as if it were an extension of her own body, a limb she had always possessed. They are moving faster than any Imperial ship could ever dream, faster than light, faster than thought. Yet there is no turbulence, there is no sense of violation, there is only a profound harmonic silence, the silence of absolute control. They are crossing the galaxy from the core to the rim in the time it takes a human heart to beat a few dozen times. They slip from one shimmering invisible portal to another, stepping between worlds as a man might step from one room of his vast, beautiful house to the next. This is the Webway, the labyrinthine dimension, the secret road, the path between the walls of reality. For the Eldari in their long, arrogant, beautiful twilight, the galaxy was not a vast, terrifying expanse. It was not a void to be conquered. It was a single, sprawling estate, and the Webway was the network of private hallways that connected every room. We are told this was their fast travel system, a convenience, a faster way to move armies, a tool, a luxury of a fallen empire. This image is a ghost. It is a watercolor painting left out in a torrent of blood, a faded tapestry of a time long dead, an echo of a song that has ended in a scream. It is a lie, a beautiful, tragic lie that the Eldari tell themselves to forget the truth. Let us look again. Let us hold that image of the star shimmer in that perfect crystalline hall. Now watch it decay. Watch the illusion shatter. The light once warm and embracing as a lover is now a cold, sterile, flickering blue, the light of a morgue's data slate. The singing crystal is silent. It has forgotten the song. Or worse, it is trying to sing, but its voice is cracked and broken, producing only a discordant, painful static. The walls, once pristine as new-fallen snow, are now filmed with a psychic residue, a greasy spiritual stain left by unutterable acts of cruelty, a patina of 10,000 years of suffering. The Eldari autarch opens her eyes, her ancient pupils contracting. The communion is gone. It has been severed as if by a jagged knife. In its place there is a cold, sharp spike of fear, an emotion so alien to her control that it almost makes her sick. The silence is no longer peaceful. It is the silence of a predator holding its breath. It is the vacuum before the explosion. The star shimmer slows, its psycho-reactive engines whining in protest. Its crew feels it. A pressure, a presence, a weight as if the very dimension is attempting to crush them, to squeeze the life from their souls. The ship's internal lights flicker, and in the momentary darkness they hear it. Whispers. Not in their language. Not in any language. It is the sound of knives being sharp, tearing cloth. It is the dry, insistent skittering sound of something enormous, crawling just outside the bounds of their perception, its many legs tapping on the other side of the crystal wall. On the faceted crystal wall, 10 meters from the ship's prow, a darkness congeals. It is not a shadow, it is an absence, a patch of the Webway that has been eaten, a void, a place where the structure of the subrealm has been dissolved, chewed away by something that does not belong. Then the void expands. A hairline crack appears in the very fabric of this subrealm. It is not a physical break. It is a metaphysical wound, a cancer. And from the wound, two things emerge. First, a color, a miasma of iridescent pink and violent bruising purple that sickens the mind, a color that screams and laughs. Second, from the heart of that impossible pulsing rift, a single, languidly sensual eye opens. It is vast, ancient, beautiful, and utterly, completely mad. And it sees everything. It sees their fears, their secret shames, their dying hopes, their proudest memories, and it finds them all delicious. The Webway is not safe. It has not been safe for 10,000 years. It was the Eldari's greatest monument, and it became their tomb. It was their sanctuary, and it became the hunting ground of the god they birthed in their own decadent excess. The pathways are fractured. The tunnels are collapsed. The great Nexus cities, once marvels of light and art, are dark, haunted ruins, adrift in a dimension that is no longer hollow, no longer clean. It is infested. It is a wound in the galaxy, and it is bleeding demons. And this brings us to the core of the matter, the pivot upon which the entire bloody, hopeless history of the 41st millennium turns. The common imperial assumption that the Webway is simply Xenos tech, a faster, cleaner version of their own hellish, unreliable warp drive, is not just an error. It is a catastrophic failure of imagination. It is the central blinding ignorance that has cost humanity its future. Because the true purpose of the Webway, its original intended magnificent purpose, was never simply travel. It was not about logistics. It was not about moving armies. It was salvation. It was ascension. It was the grand final solution to the galaxy's most terrible existential problem, the Chaos Gods. It was a way to surgically permanently liberate sentient life from the parasitic emotional vortex of the Empyrean. It was a path to a future where humanity could evolve, grow its inevitable vast psychic potential, without that very potential acting as a dinner bell for the horrors of the warp. It was the emperor of mankind's secret grandest plan, his true great crusade. Not a crusade of conquest of worlds and armies, but a crusade of engineering, a crusade of creation, a project to build a new human-controlled section of this labyrinth hidden beneath his own palace, to connect it to the ancient shattered Eldari paths, and finally to move all of humanity into a protected realm, a dimension of safety and reason, to abandon the warp forever, to render the navigators and their cursed eye obsolete, to render the astropaths and their psychic screaming obsolete, to starve the dark gods of their primary food source, to let them wither and die in their empty, emotionless hell, to win the great and terrible game not by fighting, but by simply elegantly walking off the board. And it was his greatest, most tragic, most profound failure. A failure brought about not by a Xenos fleet or a distant star god, but by the arrogance, the desperation, and the catastrophic, well-intentioned folly of his own son, Magnus the Red. This is the story of that dream. The dream of a future that was stolen before it was even born. The web of broken dreams. To understand the tragedy of what was lost, we must first understand the glory of what was built. We must ask the questions that define our grim, dark present. What was this impossible architecture really, this labyrinth between the veil? How was it built by gods long dead? How did the key to a golden age, the inheritance of Eldari, decay into a labyrinth of monsters, and now in the endless dark and echoing corridors of a promise unfulfilled? Who and what has made it their home? Before there was the Imperium, before the Eldari had built their first star-spanning empire, before the concept of humanity had even flickered in the minds of its creators, there was a race defined by a single, all-consuming and bitter truth. They were the Necrontyr, and their lives were a curse. They were born on a world of such cruel radioactive spite that their bodies were their own executioners. They were a civilization of cancer, of radiation sickness, of frail flesh that cracked and failed before their brilliant minds had even reached their prime. Their lives were short, brutal, and filled with the absolute agonizing terror of inevitable death. They were a people of the tomb, and they despised it. They looked to the stars not with wonder, but with a cold, jealous rage. For in the infinite, silent dark, they saw other forms of life. And above all, they saw the masters of it all. The Old Ones. The Old Ones were everything the Necrontyr were not. They were timeless masters of the psychic arts gardeners of the cosmos, who seeded worlds with new life as a whim. Their understanding of the universe was so profound that they saw life, time, and energy as mere clay to be sculpted. To the bitter dying Necrontyr, the very existence of the Old Ones was an intolerable insult. Their immortality was a flaunted treasure, their casual creation of vibrant, long-lived races a mockery of the Necrontyr's brief, painful span. A war was declared, a war of the dying against the eternal, a war of bitter, frail flesh against psychic gods, and the Necrontyr lost. They were pushed back, their short-lived empires shattered, their fleets turned to dust. They were driven to the brink of extinction, humiliated, broken, and left to rot under their malignant sun. It was in this final, absolute moment of species-wide despair, a bottomless well of hatred and fear, that their last, desperate prayer was answered. It was not a prayer to a god, but to the cold, dark physics of the universe itself. And the universe answered. They were not gods. They were cosmic predators, vast ethereal parasites that had fed on the energetic hearts of newborn stars since the dawn of time. They were the Citan, the star gods, beings of pure, formless energy, and the Necrontyr, in their desperation, offered them a prison and a bargain. They forged bodies of living metal necrodermis, a trap to lure the star vampires into the material realm. The Citan descended, and they found they liked the material forms. They liked the sensation of power, of direct physical control. And they saw the Necrontyr's burning singular hatred for the Old Ones. They offered a pact, a simple, terrible exchange. We will give you the immortality you crave, their voices promised, the sound of dying galaxies and collapsing nebulae. We will give you the unity to conquer. We will give you the weapons to claim your vengeance upon the Old Ones who have so insulted you. All we ask is that you give yourselves to us, completely. The price was the soul, the cost was everything. The great, terrible process of biotransference began. The remaining billions of Necrontyr, the sick, the dying, the bitter, the vengeful, marched in their frail, cancerous bodies into vast, screaming flesh of their pain, of their fear, of their joy, of their love, of their individuality. Their consciousness, their very essence, was poured like molten data, a screaming digital ghost into new bodies of tireless, self-repairing living metal. They emerged as the Necrons. They were immortal. They were unified under a single cold will, and they were utterly, irrevocably dead. They had won their war against mortality only to lose everything that made life worth living. Now led by their gluttonous, world-eating star god masters, the true war in heaven began. This was not a war as mortals understand it. This was an apocalypse. It was a war of extermination on a galactic scale, a conflict fought with weapons that tore the very fabric of reality itself. The Citan, in their gleaming metal bodies, unleashed energies that could extinguish suns, that could rewind time to erase a species' birth, that could shatter whole constellations into cosmic dust. The Necron legions, a silent silver tide of death, marched across the stars, tireless and implacable, their gas weapons stripping atoms from their targets, leaving nothing behind. The Old Ones pressed on all sides were horrified by this cold, soulless, mechanical perfection, this unkillable, unending tide of metal death. And so they unleashed their own weapon, a power the Citan, for all their mastery of the material universe, could not touch and did not understand. They were masters of the psychic realm, the immaterium, the sea of souls. In this ancient primordial era, the realm we now call the Warp was not the hellscape of the 41st millennium. It was a place of relative calm. It was a mirror, a deep conceptual ocean that reflected the emotions of the galaxy's nascent life. It was turbulent in places, yes, stormy with the passions of living beings, but it was not sentient. It was not in itself malignant. It was a tool, and the Old Ones were its grandest artisans. To fight the Necron tide, they began to engineer new life. They created races of warriors bred for strength and critically for psychic potential, designed to be living weapons that could channel the power of the immaterium. They created the Krork, the ancient powerful ancestors of the modern orcs, a green tide of perfect genetically engineered warriors. And they created the Aeldari, a race of such psychic grace and profound power that they could channel the immaterium as easily as they breathed. This was their greatest, most terrible mistake. The war in heaven was a conflict of such unimaginable scale, such profound, mind-breaking horror, that it changed the very nature of the universe. The suffering was absolute. Trillions upon trillions of sentient minds, Necrontyr in their final screaming moments of flesh, Eldari Krork, and 1,000 other forgotten races died in agony, in rage, in terror. All of that raw, unadulterated primal emotion did not simply vanish. It poured into the sea of souls. It was a psychic deluge, a torrent of pure, concentrated agony, hatred, and fear, flooding the calm mirror of the immaterium. And in that poisoned, churning ocean, something began to coagulate. The first predators were born. The vast, formless psychic energies fed by this galactic feast of slaughter began to achieve a cold, terrible consciousness. They were not yet the 4 great ruinous gods of chaos. They were something more primal, more ancient. The first demons, the enslavers, psychic leeches, formless hunters of the soul that saw the bright, shining psychic lights of the living as a beacon, as food. The old ones watched in pure, unadulterated horror. Their own weapon, the psychic energy they had nurtured, had turned against them. The more they fought, the more they encouraged their new psychic races to channel the warp, the more they fed this new, formless enemy. They were fueling the very tempest that was now beginning to consume them. The warp was no longer a mirror. It was a storm. And in that storm, monsters were waking up. The trap was perfect. The old ones, the masters of the galaxy, were now caught in an unwinnable pincer movement, a war on 2 fronts that defined the very nature of existence. On one side, in the material universe in real space, they faced the Necrons and their Citan masters, a cold, soulless technological foe that was immune to their psychic powers, a foe that could not be reasoned with, that could not be frightened, that could only exterminate. Their weapons unmade the laws of physics. Their legions were a tide of immortal, self-repairing metal. To fight them was to fight a mathematical certainty of erosion. On the other side, in the psychic universe, in the immaterium, they faced the nameless, horrifying entities their own war had birthed, the enslavers and the first demons drawn to the psychic light of the old ones, and their creations like sharks to blood in the water. To use their own psychic power, their greatest strength was to ring the dinner bell to invite possession to open rifts and allow these new screaming horrors into reality. They were beset by the soulless and the soul-eaters. They were attacked by the material and the immaterial. They could not remain in real space for the seat of the warp, for the enslavers were waiting to devour them. They were gods, and they were checkmated. They needed a third way. An escape, a path that was neither one realm nor the other, a place outside the screaming dichotomy of their failed creation. If they could not travel through the turbulent, monster-filled warp, and they could not endure the cold, slow paths of real space now dominated by their enemy, they would have to build their own road, a road that existed between the walls of reality, a sterile, artificial, and above all, safe dimension, a network of tunnels shielded from the predators of the immaterium and hidden from the cold gaze of the Citan. It would be a strategic weapon, a way to move their remaining armies with impossible speed to strike at the Necrons from angles they could not predict. But more than that, it would be a bunker, a sanctuary, a last desperate hope for the future of life itself. They began to weave it using their most advanced psychic sciences, creating a dimension that would one day be known as the Webway. It was not a project of convenience. It was an act of pure cosmic desperation. It was the last great gamble of a dying pantheon. It is not real space. the cold, hard, indifferent vacuum governed by the brutal laws of physics, where time moves in a relentless linear march. It is not the immaterium, the roiling psychic ocean of chaos, the unplace of raw emotion where time is meaningless and thought becomes ravenous sentient reality. The Webway is the third option, the impossible, brilliant, desperate solution. It is a subrealm, an artificially constructed and meticulously engineered dimension, a masterpiece of psychic architecture on a scale that defies mortal comprehension. Imagine the skin of reality, the membrane that separates the material from the immaterial, the is from the what if. The old ones with their godlike understanding of cosmic law did not punch a hole through that membrane as the crude warp drives of later races would do. That was the path to madness, the equivalent of drilling a hole in the hull of a submarine while at the bottom of a crushing, monster-filled ocean. No, they did something infinitely more elegant, more complex. They pinched the membrane. They found a way to weave a network of stable, self-contained tunnels within the barrier itself. It is a labyrinth of capillaries, a network of shimmering, invisible veins running parallel to reality existing between the walls. It is a place with its own distinct laws. It has a down and an up, a forward and a back. But these are concepts defined by the will of its creators, not by gravity or magnetism. It is a dimension crafted, not discovered. It is a testament to the idea that if the two choices you are given are oblivion or damnation, the only correct answer is to build a third. But how do you build a dimension? You do not forge it from steel. You do not weld it with plasma. You cannot build a road that exists outside of physics with physics. You must build it from a material that understands both. A material that is part material, part thought. The old ones were the masters of psychoplastics, and their ultimate creation was the substance that would later be known by the Eldari as Wraithbone or Idwrath. It is not a material in the human sense. It is a psychic substance, solidified emotion and mental energy given form and function. It is closer to a crystal, yet it is flexible. It is stronger than adamantium, yet it is lighter than air. It is grown, not manufactured. A skilled artisan, a bone singer, can shape it with their mind, singing a psychic song that coaxes the substance from the warp, purifying it of any taint and commanding it to form a specific shape, a weapon, a ship, a house, or in this case, a universe. The old ones with their unimaginable power became the first and greatest bone singers. They seeded the primary trunks of the Webway. They sang the first foundational notes that brought the main corridors into existence. They laid down the superhighways of this new, impossible dimension, vast tunnels that would connect the galaxy's most vital strategic points. But they were a race at war, a pantheon in its twilight. They did not have the time, or perhaps the numbers, to weave the infinite complexity of the final network. Their creation was a skeleton, a magnificent galaxy-spanning framework. It needed others to complete it. It needed custodians, gardeners, artisans to maintain the impossible structure, and more importantly, to expand it to weave the millions of smaller capillaries, the side passages, the secret routes, the residential districts. And so they delegated. They imbued this skill, this innate psychic gift for creation and shaping into their most promising, most refined creations. They gave the Eldari the gift of the bone singer. They gave them the keys to the labyrinth. They tasked them with inheriting, maintaining, and ultimately completing this grand last work. The Webway was not just a gift. It was a responsibility, a living system that required constant psychic tending, lest its walls of pure, solidified thought begin to thin, to fray, to forget their own shape. The purpose at its inception was twofold. It was an escape, and it was a sword. Its first, most immediate, and most desperate function was as a secure, strategic transport network. The Old Ones were losing the war. The Satan and their Necron legions were a tide of cold, logical, material death. Their mastery of real space was near absolute. They moved in their inert drive tomb ships, slow, implacable, and predictable. But their flaw was that they were bound by the very physics they championed. They could not move faster than light without using crude physical distortion. They could not travel through the immaterium they despised and did not understand. The Webway changed the rules of the war. Suddenly, the Old Ones and their Aeldari vassals could strike from nowhere. They could move an entire fleet from one side of the galaxy to the other in an instant. They could appear deep behind Necron lines, shatter a tomb world, and vanish before the Necrons' slow, logical command protocols could even register the attack. It was the two-dimensional chessboard into a three-dimensional labyrinth, and only one side held the map. But this strategic advantage, vital as it was secondary to its true long-term purpose. It was a sanctuary. The warp was now poison. The predators born of the war's psychic fallout were growing stronger. The Enslaver Plague was a very real existential threat, a tide of psychic possession that could wipe out entire civilizations. The Webway by its very nature was sealed. Its wraithbone walls were more than physical barriers. They were psychic barriers. They were anathema to the creatures of the warp. A demon could not simply breach a Webway tunnel any more than a fish could choose to climb a tree. The subrealm was a sterile, clean environment, shielded from the Immaterium's chaotic influence. Here inside this grand network, psychic races like the Aeldari could flourish. They could use their powers, grow their potential, and live their lives without fear of possession, without their every emotion feeding the nascent hungry gods in the dark. It was a haven, a protected garden where the future of sentient psychic life could be nurtured safe from the storm of chaos and the soulless cold extinction offered by the Necrons. It was the cradle for the next age of the galaxy. The war in heaven ended not with a victor, but with a galaxy swept clean of its gods. The Old Ones, the grand architects of life, were gone. They were shattered, devoured by the psychic monsters they had unleashed or hunted to extinction by the cold, implacable Necrons. Their final desperate gamble, the Webway was left unfinished, a magnificent, echoing, and now empty skeleton. Their enemies fared little better. The Satan, the star gods, in their moment of absolute triumph, were themselves betrayed. Their own slaves, the Necrons, finally roused from their cold, metallic torpor by a spark of their old consciousness rose up. They shattered their masters, breaking the Satan into shards, eternal prisoners of their own hubris. And then, with the galaxy devoid of their creators and their enslavers, the Necrons, their long vengeance complete, and their souls forever lost, simply stopped. They retreated to their tomb worlds, their great purpose fulfilled, and initiated the Great Sleep, sealing themselves in stasis to wait for a galaxy that might one day be theirs again. The board was cleared. The galactic stage was left empty, the silence profound. The great ancient powers had annihilated one another. And into this vast, silent vacuum stepped the children, the inheritors, the Aeldari. They had been the Old One's finest creation, their most subtle and powerful living weapon. And now they were the sole inheritors of a galaxy that was for the first time theirs for the taking. The Krork, their brutish warrior cousins, devolved without their master's guidance, becoming the rampaging savage orcs. But the Aeldari flourished. Their minds, perfectly and innately attuned to the psychic arts, were the keys to the kingdom. And that kingdom was the Webway. They were the ones who had been taught the songs. They were the bone singers, the artisans, the gardeners left to tend the abandoned, half-finished sanctuary. They entered the silent, crystalline corridors not as refugees, but as masters. Where the Old Ones had laid down the great continent-spanning highways, the Aeldari began to weave the intricate, delicate network of city streets, side alleys, and secret passages. Their population exploded, and their empire expanded at a speed that defied physics, because it did not use physics. It used the Webway. They did not need to send slow, arduous colony ships. They simply opened a shimmering portal in their home city and stepped onto a new virgin world 1,000 light years away. They connected millions of planets, linking their exodite paradise worlds, their core forge worlds, and their grand political hubs into a single cohesive, instantaneous empire. The Webway became the circulatory system of their civilization, a living, breathing extension of their collective will, growing as their empire grew its wraith-bone walls, singing in harmony with the psychic resonance of its new, joyful and arrogant masters. This was the Golden Age, the apex of a civilization so advanced, so powerful, that its memory would haunt the galaxy for millions of years. And the Webway was not merely a tool of this empire, it was the empire. The Eldari did not just travel through the labyrinth, they began to live there. Why build a city on the mundane soil of a planet, subject to weather geology and the crass concerns of real space, when you could build a city of pure, sculpted light, suspended forever in the beautiful, sterile, and safe dimension of your own making? Great cities' hubs of commerce, art, and philosophy were constructed inside the Webway itself. They were nexus points, vast, shimmering structures of wraithbone that defied gravity, with towers that pierced the non-existent sky of the subrealm, their light shining in the crystalline twilight. Libraries were built there, repositories of knowledge so vast they contained the complete histories of 1,000 fallen races. Temples were grown dedicated to the new, vibrant and passionate gods that the Eldari's own psychic energies were now bringing to life in the calm, uncorrupted parts of the warp. The Webway was their home. It was their sanctuary. It was the ultimate expression of their power. From within its protected walls, they looked out at the rest of the galaxy. The crude, evolving humans, the barbaric orcs as a man, might look out from his fortress palace at the wild, untamed beasts squabbling in the mud below. They were untouchable. They were immortal. They were masters of a realm that was shielded from chaos, hidden from their sleeping Necron foes, and inaccessible to all others. The Webway was the symbol of their absolute, unquestioned, and they believed eternal domination of the galaxy. It was a perfect system, and in its perfection lay the seeds of its own spectacular doom. The Eldari Empire had no equal. It had no rival. The Necrons, their ancient soulless terror, were a forgotten myth, slumbering in their dusty tombs. The rampaging orcs were a brutish fungal problem, a form of pest control, not a strategic threat. The nascent humans were primitive, superstitious mammals, clinging to their single, insignificant birth world. For the Eldari, the war was over, the galaxy was won, and in this perfect, unchallenged, unending victory, their civilization began to rot. There were no more frontiers to conquer. There were no more challenges to overcome. The only territory left to explore was the frontier of the self, the infinite, uncharted landscape of sensation. And the Webway, their greatest achievement, the very symbol of their mastery, became the engine of their damnation. It was a tool of absolute, instantaneous gratification. Any desire, no matter how obscure, how fleeting, how dark, could be fulfilled immediately. An Eldari on a world at the galaxy's eastern fringe could feel a sudden passing craving for a specific nectar-like wine grown only on a paradise world in the westernmost reach. In the old days, such a desire would be a poetic impossibility. Now he simply thought it willed it, and a servant drone would step through a shimmering portal in his chambers, the chilled, jeweled flask in hand, having crossed 1,000,000 light years in a heartbeat. A philosopher wished to debate the finer points of shadow sculpture with a master artisan. He did not send a message. He simply stepped through the gate in his study and was in the artisan's studio seconds later. It was a civilization without friction, without want, and in the absence of want, desire metastasized. Simple pleasures became bland. Beauty became boring. They needed more. They needed sensation that was sharper, more profound, more extreme. They needed to feel something that could pierce the numbing veil of their own perfection. The cults began as whispers. The cult of the Gilded Pox, who sought transcendence through exquisite psychoactive diseases. The seekers of the final sense who believed the ultimate truth could only be found in the moment of a lesser being's orchestrated, perfectly artistic death. These were not fringe groups. They became the mainstream. They were philosophy's celebrated art forms. And the Webway was their vector. It was a psychic contagion. A new, thrilling, depraved idea conceived in a palace of crystal and bone on one world could be practiced, refined, and shared with 1 billion citizens on 1,000 other worlds before the local sun had even set. The Webway became a high-speed network for spiritual sickness. Great pleasure barges, vast as cities, plied the crystalline corridors, not moving from planet to planet, but existing as permanent mobile carnivals of excess within the labyrinth itself. They staged symphonies of cruelty, broadcasting their ecstatic, agonized, heightened emotions. And all of that psychic noise, all of that raw, concentrated, debased emotion bled through. The Webway walls, though they blocked demons, were not impervious to the emotions of their masters. The Eldari were screaming their decadence into the immaterium, and the Webway was the megaphone. And the Webway began to react. It was after all made of wraithbone. It was a psychic construct attuned to the minds of its masters. And its masters were becoming monsters. The first signs were subtle, easily dismissed by a people, drowning in their own arrogance. The bone singers, those tasked with maintaining the labyrinth structure, were the first to notice. They would sing the ancient songs of mending and the walls, would not sing back. The light in the corridors, once a warm, golden, welcoming resonance, began to change. It grew colder. It took on a greasy, purplish, sickly hue, the color of a fresh bruise. The air felt clammy. A spiritual residue, a psychic film of pure, unadulterated selfishness, was beginning to coat the once pristine walls. Then the remote sections began to fail. Tunnels that had been stable for 1 million years suddenly snapped. They became dark, lightless voids, their wraithbone structure dissolving their portals, sealing themselves forever. Expeditions sent to investigate these dead zones simply vanished, their psychic cries cut off in mid-scream. The Eldari leadership, lost in their pursuit of the next great sensation, paid it no mind. It was a technical problem, a minor inconvenience. The labyrinth was infinite. What did it matter if a few forgotten hallways collapsed? They were too proud, too high to see the truth. They did not see the cracks forming in the foundations of their palace. They did not hear the whispers that now echoed in the dead zones, whispers that sounded chillingly like their own, but twisted, hungry, and impersisibly, terrifyingly new. But not all were so blind. Some were, in fact, the most clear-sighted of all. They were not heroes or prophets warning of the end. They were the opposite. They were the leaders of the darkest cults, the arch-architects of the depravity, the connoisseurs of pain. And because they waded so deep in the psychic filth, they were the first to feel the predator that was congealing in the depths of the warp. They were the first to sense the great gathering thirst that their own actions were feeding. They did not feel remorse. They felt fear. The cold, practical, intelligent fear of a master criminal who hears the sirens approaching. They knew the feast was ending. They knew the bill was coming due. They knew the psychic apocalypse, the Rana Dandra, was not just possible but inevitable. The Empire and everyone in it was doomed to be devoured. They did not try to stop it. They did not try to warn the others. That would be a waste of precious time, and besides, the screams of their dying race would be such a delicious final vintage. They would not flee into real space. That was a primitive, dirty void, and the coming psychic shockwave would scour it clean. They would not flee into the warp. That was the monster's very mouth. No, they would hide where they had always lived. They would hide in the labyrinth. They began in absolute secrecy to find the deepest, most hidden, most forgotten sections of the Webway. The satellite realms, the pocket dimensions, the infinite dark spaces between the main tunnels that even the old ones had not fully mapped. They began to build a new home, a city of shadow. They used their vast resources to hijack portals, to steal sections of their own cities, to drag slave populations, captured Xenos, and even small captured stars into this hidden nexus. They were building a lifeboat of pure shadow, a parasitic kingdom that would feed on the Webway's energies, a fortress of spite and shadow, shielded from the psychic death scream they knew was about to tear the galaxy in half. They called their secret growing city Comera. It was not a new capital. It was an ark built by the galaxy's most depraved minds, designed to ride out the flood of their own making. It was not a sound. It was an event, a psychic Caesarean section on a galactic scale, a birth so violent it tore the universe open. For millennia, the Eldari had poured their every excess, their every thrill, their every dark, exquisite, agonizing sensation into the immaterium. They had fed that psychic ocean with a banquet of pure, refined emotion, a feast of decadence so vast it had finally woken something up. Or rather, it had created something. A new god. A god of pleasure, of pain, of excess in all its forms, of the insatiable, agonizing thirst for more. The Eldari had conceived a god in their own degenerate image, and now that god was born. The birth scream of Slaanesh, she who thirsts, tore across the galaxy. It was a wave of pure psychic energy, a tsunami of raw, ecstatic agony that moved faster than light, faster than thought. In real space, it punched a hole in the galaxy, a vast, permanent wound that would come to be known as the Eye of Terror. At the heart of the Eldari Empire, on their core worlds, billions of Eldari died in a single, horrifying instant. Their souls were not just extinguished, they were sucked out, vacuumed from their bodies, a screaming harvest for the newborn hungry god. Their beautiful crystalline cities collapsed into dust. Their paradise worlds were transformed into demon-haunted hellscapes. The Eldari Empire, the greatest power the galaxy had known since the war in heaven, was dead. It had died in a single orgasmic, agonizing shriek. But the cataclysm was not confined to the material realm. The Webway, the labyrinthine dimension, was made of wraithbone. It was a psychoreactive substance, a network of solidified thought. It was attuned to its masters, and its masters had just screamed themselves to death. The psychic shockwave of Slaanesh's birth did not just pass by the Webway, it hit it like a sledgehammer shattering a complex sculpture of glass. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The pristine, stable, self-contained dimension was shattered. The wraithbone walls, already stained and weakened by millennia of Eldari decadence, now cracked. And they did not just crack. They tore open. For the first time since their creation, great gaping, bleeding wounds were ripped in the very fabric of the subrealm. And these wounds did not open onto the cold, sterile void of real space. They opened directly into the raging, incandescent hell of the immaterium. They opened into the very heart of the storm. For the first time, the predators of the warp, the daemons, the formless hunters of the soul had a way in. They saw these new, jagged rifts in the labyrinth's walls, and they poured through them like a flood breaking a dam. They were a tide of screaming, laughing, gibbering, impossible madness, a plague of pure chaos, flooding the sterile, ordered corridors of the Old One's great work. The sanctuary had been breached. The fortress had fallen. The Webway, as a single contiguous galaxy-spanning entity, ceased to exist. It died in that same instant as the Eldari Empire. It was no longer a perfect, unified network. It was a shattered, fragmented, and haunted ruin. Vast sections were destroyed outright, dissolved by the psychic shockwave, their tunnels collapsing into nothingness, leaving their occupants stranded in a dark, dead-end dimension. Other sections, the ones near the greatest breaches, were overrun, completely becoming permanent extensions of the realm of chaos, places where the walls themselves writhed with demonic faces, and the very air screamed with agony. The great Nexus cities, the beautiful marvels of light and art suspended within the labyrinth, were extinguished. They were not just conquered, they were eaten. Their wraithbone structures were corrupted, their inhabitants consumed their lights, turning to a cold, malignant darkness. What was left was a broken, disconnected series of fragments. Thousands of shattered, isolated pathways, floating adrift in the subrealm, their portals severed. Travel became a nightmare. A gate that once led to a paradise world might now open onto a legion of shrieking bloodletters, or a dead-end tunnel filled with the laughing, whispering echoes of the damned. Or perhaps most terrifying of all, onto nothing at all, a lightless void that simply ended. The Webway was no longer a home. It was no longer a convenience. It had become the cursed labyrinth, a haunted, shattered tomb, a dark and secret battlefield where the whispers of demons now echoed louder than the songs of its creators. And in their dark city of Comora, the Drukhari watched it all and smiled. Their ark had survived. While the Eldari were dying, screaming in the psychic inferno of their own creation, a new power was rising. Humanity. United under a single golden enigmatic figure, the Emperor of mankind. His great crusade was a tide of steel and fire of legions and primarchs washing across the galaxy, reclaiming the lost, scattered colonies of man. To his sons, to his generals, to the very Imperium, he was building this crusade was the plan. The unification of humanity, the forging of a galactic empire, the establishment of the imperial truth that banished superstition and false gods. This was a lie. A necessary, magnificent, and all-encompassing lie. The Great Crusade was not the goal. It was a distraction. It was a holding action. It was the Emperor buying time. Because the Emperor, a being of unimaginable psychic power and foresight, a man who had walked the earth for 30,000 years, saw a truth that no one else could. He saw the flaw in his own perfect design. That flaw was the warp, the immaterium, the very means by which his glorious galaxy-spanning imperium was held together. He saw the righteous fury, and every ship just like it, plunging blind and screaming through a sea of monsters. He saw the navigator Patroclus weeping blood, his mutation, a necessary grotesque pact with powers that should never be touched. He saw his astropaths, their minds burning out like dying stars, their souls forfeit just to send a single desperate message. He knew this was not sustainable. This was not victory. This was a species walking a tightrope over a volcano, pretending the heat was just a mild inconvenience. The Emperor saw the long, slow future of his species. He knew with absolute certainty that humanity was a psychic race. Their evolution was accelerating. This psychic potential, this connection to the Sea of Souls was their destiny. It was their next great evolutionary step. And it was a death sentence. He had seen what had happened to the Eldari, a refined, controlled, ancient race, and their psychic awakening had birthed a god that devoured their empire in a single instant. Now he looked at humanity, a race of trillions, unruly, emotional, violent, passionate, brimming with raw, uncontrolled, explosive psychic potential. When their time came, when their psychic evolution reached its peak, they would not birth one god. They would be a perpetual, unending, galaxy-wide buffet for the four great ruinous powers, already waiting, glutted and monstrous. The Eye of Terror was not an anomaly. It was a preview. Humanity's psychic awakening, if left unchecked, would be a new, greater species-wide fall. A cataclysm that would turn the entire Imperium into a realm of chaos. This was the ticking bomb. His reliance on the warp was the fuse. His solution was as audacious as it was brilliant. He too saw the Webway. But where the Eldari saw a home they had lost, the Emperor saw a foundation he could claim. He had studied it. He had plumbed its secret, shattered depths. He had, through means none could fathom, found what the Old Ones had left behind. He had found a sealed, hidden, vast Webway portal deep beneath the Himalayan mountains on Terra itself. And he had a plan. A true plan. He would not simply use the Eldari's broken, demon-haunted labyrinth. That was a fool's errand. He would build his own. He would engineer a new human-centric extension. A section of the Webway forged by human science and imperial will, anchored to Terra, stabilized, cleaned, and perfected. He would create a new, shining capital for mankind, not on the soil of Terra, but within the labyrinth itself. A city of light. And once this human-built section was stable, he would use his own supreme psychic might to act as a bridge, a key, to carefully, methodically connect his new golden corridors to the old shattered but still functional main trunks of the Eldari network. He would piece by piece reclaim the labyrinth. He would bypass the broken demon-filled sections, seal them off, and create a new, clean, contiguous, human-controlled Webway. This was the Imperial Webway project, and this leads to the ultimate secret goal. The true purpose of the Great Crusade of the Imperium of his entire 30,000-year gambit. It was not just about travel, it was about liberation. Once the human Webway was complete, the Imperium would no longer need the warp. Fleets would move through its safe crystalline tunnels, not the roiling hell of the Immaterium. The navigators with their dangerous mutations would become obsolete. The astropaths, their minds a gateway for demonic possession, would be replaced by instantaneous, perfectly safe psychic communication within the shielded network. And most importantly, humanity itself, the entire species, would be moved. Trillions of human beings would be over generations relocated from their vulnerable worlds in real space and into the vast, protected, custom-built cities inside the Webway. They would be taken off the board, and in doing so, the Emperor would achieve his final checkmate victory against the greatest enemy of all. He would starve the Chaos Gods. The ruinous powers were parasites. They fed on the psychic energy, the emotions, the souls of the living. They fed on the terror of a warp jump, the blind rage of a battlefield, the whispered prayers of a billion desperate, frightened souls. By moving humanity, their greatest and most numerous food source, into a sealed, psychically sterile dimension, the Emperor would cut them off. He would turn off the tap. The Chaos Gods, denied their sustenance, would wither. They would diminish, fade, and die. Humanity, meanwhile, would be safe within their protected realm, free to complete their psychic evolution, to become the masters of their own potential, without the fear of predation, without their very souls being the price of their own existence. This was the plan. Not conquest, not empire, ascension. A future of reason, of science, of psychic mastery in a galaxy, finally permanently cleansed of the gods of chaos. And the Webway was the key to it all. It was the greatest secret of the Imperium. A secret kept not only from the galaxy, but from the Imperium itself. While the Great Crusade raged across the stars, while his sons Gillim and Dawn Horus were celebrated as the architects of a new age, the true work was being done in silence, in darkness, deep beneath the bedrock of Terra. Far below the foundations of the Imperial Palace, beneath the dungeons, beneath the geothermal generators, beneath even the ancient forgotten geology of the planet, lay the Emperor's most prized, most guarded secret. A vast, shimmering archway. It was not a door of steel or stone. It was a rift in reality. A stable, sealed Webway portal, ancient beyond human reckoning, a relic of the Old One's first great construction. For millennia, the Emperor had protected it, shielding it with his own psychic might, waiting for the day his great work could begin. Now that day had come. Through this portal, he began his true project. This was not a realm of gilded halls and marching legions. It was a construction site, a vast, echoing, impossible void. The Emperor had used his power to secure a dead zone within the labyrinth, a vast, stable but empty pocket dimension, a blank canvas adjacent to the main trunk lines. And into this void he poured the genius of mankind. Thousands upon thousands of workers toiled in absolute secrecy. Not common laborers, but the elite. Legions of the Adeptus Mechanicus, the finest tech priests and artisans from Mars, their red robes stark against the shimmering, pearlescent non-sky. They worked alongside divisions of human engineers, logisticians, and architects, all sworn to an oath of silence so profound it was psychically branded onto their souls. They were building a city for the future of their entire species. It was a city of light, a metropolis of pure reason, designed to house billions. Its towers were not built of cold iron, but of psychoconductive alloys and self-repairing playscrete, designed to resonate with the psychic harmony of a protected humanity. Vast biodomes were being raised capable of sustaining entire ecosystems. Energy networks drawing power directly from the strange ethereal currents of the sub-realm itself were being laid. It was man's greatest engineering marvel, a monument to the imperial truth, a promise of a future free from the horrors of the warp. But this construction site was not in real space. It was in a dimension that bordered the immaterium. It was a sterile, sealed room, yes, but the walls of that room were adjacent to hell. The Emperor's enemies, the newly cognizant and terrified gods of chaos, could feel what he was doing. They could sense this grand project, this existential threat to their very survival. They could feel him building a fortress designed to starve them, and they threw themselves against the walls of his tiny, sealed-off section of the Webway. Demonic legions, tides of pure, screaming madness, clawed and tore at the psychoactive wraithbone from the outside, trying to find a crack, a flaw, a single point of entry. They were a constant besieging psychic storm, and they were held back by a single colossal act of will. The Emperor could not be there in person. He was leading the crusade, the grand distraction. He needed a proxy. He needed a machine. This was the original true purpose of the Golden Throne. It was not a life support system. It was not a prison for a dying god. Not yet. In this golden age, the Golden Throne was the most complex, powerful, and terrifying psychic engine ever conceived by man. It was a lighthouse. It was a shield generator. It was a colossal psychic bulwark. The Emperor sat upon it only when he needed to channeling his vast galaxy-spanning consciousness through its arcane machinery. But its primary function was to act as a control hub and a psychic amplifier. It allowed him to project a vast, golden, impregnable psychic barrier inside the Webway, a wall of pure divine will that surrounded the entire human construction zone. It was this golden shield that kept the demons at bay. It was this machine that kept the workers sane, that kept the tides of madness from flooding in and tearing the City of Light apart before its first tower was even completed. The Golden Throne was the lock. The Emperor's mind was the key. And it was all working. The project was decades ahead of schedule. The dream was becoming reality. It came as a vision. A psychic scream of betrayal so potent it tore through the fabric of the cosmos. On the sorcerous world of Prospero Magnus, the Red, the Crimson King, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, his great cyclopean eye staring into the depths of the immaterium, saw it all. He had broken his father's sacred oath, the Edict of Nicaea, which forbade this very kind of deep psychic augury. He had done it to prove his loyalty, to show that the warp could be controlled, that it was a tool, not a master. And in that forbidden ocean of knowledge, he found a truth that shattered his mind. He saw his brother, Horus Lupercal, the beloved War Master, the first son, and he saw him changed. He saw Horus standing over the bleeding, broken body of their brother Sanguinius. He saw fire raining from the sky over Terra. He saw the black banners of treason unfurled, adorned with the 8-pointed star of chaos. He saw the pacts made in darkness, the legions corrupted, the galaxy betrayed. It was not a possibility. It was a certainty, a future already written in the blood of billions, a cold, absolute terror, a grief so profound it threatened to unmake him, seized the Crimson King. He had to warn his father. He had to stop this. The galaxy, the dream, everything depended on it. He tried. He gathered his vast psychic might and screamed a warning across the stars, aiming his thoughts at the golden, shining beacon that was the Emperor's mind. But his message found only static. A storm, a raging, unnatural psychic tempest, now choked the immaterium, a storm he himself had not foreseen. Every path was blocked, every psychic route choked with laughing, malicious entities. He was isolated. The Chaos Gods, the architects of Horus's fall, were insulating their grand betrayal. They were letting this happen, shielding their new champion from the very psychic warning that might undo their plans. Magnus roared in the dark, a god-king trapped in a cage of his own making. He was desperate, he was grieving, he was frightened. And in that perfect moment of weakness, a new voice whispered in his mind. It did not laugh, it did not threaten. It was calm, reasonable, intricate as a snowflake, ancient as a dying star. It was the voice of Tzeentch, the changer of ways, the great deceiver, the god of forbidden knowledge that Magnus had so long and so foolishly believed he could master. Your father has shielded his mind, the whisper insinuated a sliver of false logic in the panic. He is blinded by his own decree. He cannot hear a simple cry. But he cannot shield all of terror. Not from you, not from his son. Your power is second only to his. You do not need to whisper Magnus. You need to shout. You need to break down the door. If you are strong enough, if you truly love him, you will find the power to punch through any mundane barrier, any psychic ward. I can show you how. I can give you the strength you need to save him. To save everyone. It was a lie wrapped in the very truth of Magnus's own arrogance. He did not see the trap. He only saw the key. Believing he was seizing control of the warp, he instead opened his soul completely to its most insidious master, accepting a dark bargain he did not even know he was making. Magnus the Red became a psychic comet, a living weapon of unimaginable power. He drew upon the deepest, darkest energies of the Sea of Souls, his own grief and desperation amplified 1,000-fold by the hidden hand of Tzeentch. He was no longer a Primarch. He was a pure, focused cyclopean lance of raw, unadulterated force. He launched his very consciousness, his soul, his everything across the galaxy. He was not aiming for his father's mind. That path was blocked. He was aiming for his father's location. He hurled himself at the psychic signature of terror, a son desperate to break down his father's door to warn him of the fire. He expected to hit the psychic static that shrouded the planet. He expected to punch through the mundane barriers of the Imperial Palace. What he hit instead was the shield. He hit the golden, intricate, perfect, secret psychic bulwark that the Emperor had woven inside the Webway. He struck the delicate, complex psychic engine of the Golden Throne itself. He being now juiced with the full, unfiltered power of a chaos god, a living battering ram of pure warp stuff, struck the wall of the sanctuary with the force of a nova. The impact was an explosion of pure metaphysical violation. A psychic scream echoed through the labyrinth that shattered Wraithbone 1,000 light-years away. On Terra, the Golden Throne erupted. Consoles exploded. Thousands of tech priests and support staff were incinerated in an instant, their souls burned out by the psychic backlash. The Emperor on the crusade felt it as a physical blow, as if his own heart had been ripped from his chest. And in the secret, human-built city of light within the Webway, the golden psychic shield shattered. It did not crack. It did not bend. It was obliterated. A vast, gaping, bleeding hole was torn in the very fabric of the Emperor's secret project. a wound that led directly from the sterile, safe construction zone into the deepest, most demon-infested screaming hells of the outer labyrinth. Magnus's warning, his desperate single broken thought, Horus, traitor, on Istvan, finally got through. It arrived carried on the shockwave of a psychic atom bomb, whispered in the sudden roaring vacuum left by the death of the dream. The dam had broken. The monsters could smell the blood in the water. For a single agonizing heartbeat, there was silence. The silence of a ruptured dam, the vacuum before the torrent. Magnus's psychic thunderclap had faded, leaving behind a ringing, perfect void. And in that void came the laughter. It was not a sound that echoed. It was a sound that penetrated. It was the sound of a billion years of caged, ravenous hunger finally being unleashed. The hole Magnus had torn in the Emperor's golden shield did not just open onto the labyrinth. It opened onto a hell that had been clawing at that very spot for decades. It was a direct, bleeding wound into the deepest, most corrupted, demon-infested warp rifts of the shattered Aeldari network. And through that wound they came. It was not a charge, it was a flood. A tide of pure, screaming, cancerous wrongness. A tsunami of impossibility of teeth and claws and iridescent, screaming color of long-dead thoughts given murderous form. Khorne's bloodletters shrieking their rage, their brass collars burning hot. Plague-bearers of Nurgle, a slow, shambling, giggling tide of filth. Their very presence causing the psychoactive alloys of the city to rust and decay in seconds. Tzeentch's horrors cackling, morphing and splitting as they unleashed bolts of pure change. And the Seekers of Slaanesh, a blur of exquisite, agonizing speed, their claws singing as they eviscerated the terrified, unarmored human workers. The City of Light, the grand unfinished monument to reason, became a slaughterhouse in less than a minute. The Mechanicus priests, their logic engines shattering at the sheer impossibility of what they were seeing, were torn apart, their augmetics fused with the demonic flesh that consumed them. The city man's greatest secret hope was screaming. Then the gold arrived, in a flash of teleportation energy so bright it momentarily banished the demonic shadows they came. The Adeptus Custodes, the Emperor's personal guard, the 10,000. They were not human. They were demigods crafted by the Emperor's own hand, their golden armor immaculate, their guardian spears blazing with energy. They had been the project's silent, watchful protectors. Now they were its only defense. They formed a phalanx, a wall of pure, unadulterated, righteous fury, their bolts and blades reaping a terrible toll. Each custodian was a hero, a being worth 1,000 lesser warriors, and they fought with a cold, perfect, preternatural skill. But they were fighting an ocean. For every demon they dispatched vaporizing its material form, 10 more clawed their way over the bodies of their kin, pouring from the gaping, roaring rift. And with them came the Nulls, the Anathema Secundus, the Sisters of Silence. Clad in grey and steel, their faces hidden, they moved with a spectral grace. They did not speak. They did not have to. Their very presence was a weapon. They were psychic blanks pariahs avoid in the warp. Where they walked, the demonic tide recoiled. Demons shrieked as their unnatural forms were choked. Their connection to the immaterium severed their substance, dissolving under the suffocating cold absence of a soul. The sisters were the key. They were the only thing that could truly harm the flood. The Custodes became their blades, their shield a golden killing wall that held the physical tide at bay, cutting a path for the sisters to advance, to try to reach the breach, to somehow impossibly seal it with their combined aura of nothingness. It was the most desperate, most tragic, most hopeless battle in Imperial history, fought in a secret city for a prize no one else knew existed. And they were losing. The tide was too strong. The rift was too wide. The sheer psychic pressure of chaos was overwhelming. The first custodians began to fall, their golden armor breached, their perfect bodies torn asunder. The sisters, though they were anathema, were not immortal. They were being swarmed, drowned in a tide of physical bodies, their null field overwhelmed by sheer impossible numbers. The line was breaking, and then from the heart of the roaring vortex it emerged. It was not a demon, not a single entity. It was an echo. It was the first murder. It was the conceptual physical manifestation of the first time brother had slain brother back in the forgotten dust of ancient terror. It was a story of betrayal given form, a living sentient shadow of malice. It called itself Drachnian, the End of Empires. It was a shard of pure anti-reality, and it walked through the battlefield unbound. The Custodes' blades passed through it as if it was smoke. Its own shimmering, impossible blade, however, was all too real. Where it struck, it did not just kill the body. It erased the soul. It undid the Emperor's work, extinguishing the Custodes' golden light, leaving only a hollow, smoking suit of armor. The very concept of the betrayal that was at that very moment unfolding across the galaxy. And it was heading for the portal, the gateway to terror. And in that instant the galaxy changed. The Emperor of mankind knew. He abandoned the Great Crusade. He abandoned his fleets. He abandoned everything. In a blaze of golden light that tore the skies of terror itself, he teleported from the bridge of his flagship directly into the heart of the City of Light. He arrived a son of pure psychic fire, his great burning sword in his hand. He was no longer the ruler, the general, or the father. He was the anathema. And he met the end of empires in battle. It was a war of concepts, a war of the future versus the past, of hope versus betrayal. And the Emperor could not destroy it. Drachnian was a truth, a fact of existence, and he could not unmake it with blade or fire. He could only contain it. As a custodian, Ra Endymion sacrificed his life, his very soul, to create a moment of distraction. The Emperor seized the creature's essence, binding it, forcing it with an unimaginable exertion of will, not into a prison of steel, but into the first true man it encountered, the custodian himself. He turned his loyal, perfect, dying son into a living cage. The fight had taken minutes. It had cost everything. The Emperor, his face a mask of cold, terrible grief, turned from the now banished foe. He looked at his city. It was gone. It was not a city. It was a volcano, a permanent, roaring, unsealable demonic vortex. The breach was no longer a crack. It was a permanent, gaping wound, a new eye of terror held open by the very energies Magnus had unleashed. The surviving Custodes, a bare fraction, were fighting a desperate, hopeless rearguard action, bleeding and dying their backs to the portal to terror. The Sisters of Silence were all but gone, swallowed by the tide. The Emperor saw the truth, a truth more painful than Horus's betrayal. The project was over. The City of Light was lost. The human Webway was a failure. The dream of ascension, the dream of starving the Chaos Gods, the dream of saving humanity from the warp, was dead. It had been murdered by his own son. The war was lost. The dream was dead. All that remained was containment, the Emperor of mankind. His psychic light, a furious, grieving inferno, stood before the great, shattered, arching gateway that led back to the Imperial Palace. Back to terror. It was no longer a portal. It was the mouth of a cannon, and it was aimed directly at the heart of humanity. The demonic tide, having consumed the City of Light, now saw its true prize. It surged, a billion-strong legion of laughing, screaming madness, directly towards the breach into real space. The last of the Custodes formed a final golden shield around their master, their spears singing a dirge of defiance as they were one by one torn apart. The Emperor knew he could not repair the breach. The energies unleashed by Magnus were too vast, too primal. The wound was permanent. He could not heal it. He could only plug it. He was the only thing in existence with the psychic power to sit in the path of that demonic hurricane, and hold it back. He was the only dam strong enough to stop the flood. He turned his back on the war. He turned his back on his dying, loyal sons. And he walked each step, a thunderclap of psychic power, back through the portal, back into the throne room on Terra. He ascended the steps of the Golden Throne. The machine was a wreck. It was a smoking ruin, its consoles shattered, its golden plating cracked and blackened from the psychic explosion. It was no longer a control hub. It was no longer an engine of creation. It was a broken, desperate, last-ditch plug. He lowered himself onto the seat, and as the first of the demons, a great roaring bloodthirster, lunged through the portal after him, the Emperor willed. He became the new shield. He poured his own infinite psychic soul energy into the damaged screaming machine. The throne roared to life, not with the song of creation, but with the shriek of a furnace being overloaded. A blinding, golden, agonizing light erupted from the Emperor, flooding the portal, acting as a colossal psychic fist, punching the demonic legion back, slamming the door shut against the hurricane. The portal was sealed. Terra was safe. For now. But the cost was absolute. The Emperor could not move. The moment his concentration wavered, the moment his psychic will faltered, for even a single second, that demonic pressure would blast the portal open and Terra would be consumed. The Golden Throne, once the instrument of humanity's ascension, had become its prison. It was now a terrible, agonizing life support system, not for his broken body. Horus had not even struck him yet, but for his will. It was a psychic amplifier, yes, but one that was now locked in a permanent, unwinnable defensive struggle. It was a curse. His dream of saving humanity from the warp had failed, and in its failure, he had permanently, irrevocably bound himself to the very machine that was meant to achieve it. He was now a prisoner of his own broken dream, a living battery, a psychic cork, holding back an ocean of damnation. This was his fate. This was his damnation, sealed not by his traitorous son, Horus, but by his loyal, desperate, and tragically mistaken son, Magnus. The future of a bright, clean, human-controlled Webway was dead. And the Emperor of mankind was now and forever the silent, screaming, enthroned guardian of its greatest failure. The great dream is dead. The City of Light is a demonic tomb. The Emperor is a corpse on a golden prison. The Webway as a hope, as a future, is a forgotten memory. But as a place, it is very much inhabited. For while the Eldari Empire died in a single ecstatic scream, and the hope of humanity was stillborn in a secret underground war, the escapees, the architects of the fall, the masters of depravity had survived. The Drukhari, the Dark Eldari, had watched the apocalypse from the safety of their hidden ark. And in the 10,000 years since they have thrived, they have built an empire not of worlds but of shadows. Their home is Comera, the Dark City. It is not a city, not truly. It is a cancer. It is a vast, parasitic, sprawling megalopolis stitched together in the deepest, most secret folds of the Webway. It is not on a planet. It is not in a star system. It is nowhere, and yet it is everywhere. It is a collection of stolen cities, captured satellites, hollowed-out asteroids, and conquered sub-realms, all dragged screaming through plundered portals and chained together in the dark. Spire upon impossible spire rises into the poisonous artificial non-sky, a sky lit only by the cold, captive light of stolen suns, stars that burn in agony, their energies slowly leached away to power the city's impossible, cruel architecture. Bridges of spun shadow and misery connect realms that should not touch. It is a city of 1 trillion souls, a place of absolute anarchy and absolute cruel order, a labyrinth within the labyrinth. This dark, impossible city exists for a single desperate purpose hiding. The Drukhari are Eldari. Their souls, just like those of their craft-world cousins, bear the mark of Slanesh. She who thirsts has a claim on them. The newborn god is constantly, eternally sipping at their souls, a slow, agonizing drain that leaves them withered, empty, and hollow. Left to their own devices, they would be consumed just like their fallen brethren. But Comera is the shield. The Dark City is nestled so deep within the labyrinth's hidden folds, so far from the great bleeding wounds of the fall, that it is shrouded. The Webway itself a dimension outside of real space, and the warp acts as a psychic baffle. The full soul-searing gaze of Slaanesh cannot find them here. The god's thirst can only touch them a slow, agonizing sip, rather than a devouring gulp. They are hidden, but they are not safe. They are still dying, just more slowly. And so they devised their solution. If their souls are being drained, they must be refilled. And the only sustenance that can replenish a soul dying of depravity is the suffering of another. The pain, the terror, the absolute refined agony of other lesser beings acts as a balm, a rejuvenating draught that refills their withered spirits and holds the thirst of Slaanesh at bay. Their entire society is built on this single, desperate, parasitic need. To the Drukhari, the Webway is not a tomb. It is not a lost dream. It is a weapon. It is a dark, secret circulatory system that allows them to feed. They are the undisputed, absolute masters of its broken corridors. While the craft-world Eldari tread carefully, wary of demonic breaches and lost pathways, the Drukhari dance through them. They know the secret routes, the back alleys, the forgotten gates. They have spent 10,000 years mapping the shattered ruins, learning its new dark geography. They are the true predators of the labyrinth. From the heart of Comera, they launch their raids. Their ships sleek, impossibly fast and silent, as a blade in the dark, burst from hidden portals appearing from nowhere in the skies of 1,000 unsuspecting worlds in real space. They strike a blur of calculated artistic cruelty, taking what they prize most slaves. They do not kill, not if they can help it. Death is a waste. They take their screaming, terrified cargo humans, orcs tow anyone, and drag them back through the portal, back into the impossible dark city. Back to the arenas, the torture chambers, the flesh vats. Back to a place where their pain will be harvested, distilled, and drunk like a fine wine, giving the Drukhari another day, another week, another year of vibrant, cruel, exquisite life. The Webway is their hunting corridor. It is their pantry. It is the network of veins that allows them, the galaxy's most sophisticated vampires, to bleed the universe dry, all from the perfect, safe, and eternal darkness of their hidden, parasitic home. They are the other survivors, the ones who saw the end coming, not with the cold, cruel calculus of the Drukhari, but with the dawning prophetic horror of those who had not yet completely lost their souls. They were the ones who fled, not into the shadows of the labyrinth, but into the cold, hard void of real space, abandoning their paradise worlds on vast, city-sized ships of living wraithbone, the craft worlds. These are their arcs, their new, slow, ponderous homes, drifting through the material galaxy islands of ancient, mournful light in a sea of darkness. But they too are Eldari. They too are bound by the curse, and they too must travel. But for them, the choices are a triptych of impossibilities. They cannot use the warp. To enter the Immaterium is to offer their souls, their bright, shining, delicious Eldari souls, directly to the open, waiting, ever-thirsty maw of Slaanesh. For them, a warp jump is not a gamble. It is suicide. And the slow, sublight crawl of real space is a death of a different kind, too slow for a dying race, too slow for a people beset on all sides by younger, more brutal species. And so they are left with only one tragic option. They must return cap in hand to the house they burned down. They must use the Webway. But the Webway they inherited is not the Webway the Drukhari mastered. The Drukhari claimed the dark heart of the labyrinth, its secret passages, and its shadow realms. The craft world Eldari are left with the broken, ghost-filled public ruins. 99% of the network is lost to them. The great trunk lines are shattered. The Nexus cities are demonic tombs. The maps their ancestors used are worse than useless. They are traps leading to sealed-off tunnels to corrupted zones, or worst of all, to portals that now open directly into the waiting web-like ambushes of their Comorite cousins. For the craft world Aeldari, the Webway is not a highway, it is a minefield. It is a tiny archipelago of known, safe paths, painstakingly recharted over 10,000 years of loss, a handful of fragile, flickering routes in an ocean of unimaginable darkness and peril. A journey for a craft-world vessel, a sliver of light like the star shimmer we once saw, is no longer a glide of arrogant silence. It is a stealth mission. It is a desperate, creeping crawl. A Farseer stands at the prow, their mind not in joyful communion, but stretched to the breaking point, a psychic probe feeling for the wrongness ahead. The corridors are dark, the singing crystal walls now mute, or worse, whispering with the echoes of the fall. They must navigate around vast, collapsed sections, the shipwrecks of entire sub-realms. They pass ghost cities, vast, empty, lightless structures, their wraithbone walls weeping a psychic residue of terror. And they are never, ever alone. A flicker of impossible pink and blue light in a side tunnel, a demonic breach, a patrol of Tzeentch's horrors, lost and gibbering in the maze. The ship's weapons must fire a desperate, silent lance of light to annihilate the threat before its screams can draw others. But the demons are a known quantity. The true terror is their kin, the flicker of a censer. A Drukhari Reaper, its hull the color of a starless void, decloaking from a shadow fold in the wall. An ambush, a raid. The craft-welders must fight their way through their elegant craft, scarred their warriors lost just to make a journey their ancestors made in a heartbeat with a passing thought. For the Drukhari, the Webway is a pantry, a hunting ground, a tool. For the craft-world Aeldari, it is a monument to their shame. It is the galaxy's most bitter I told you so. Every journey is a reminder. Every shattered archway, every demonic echo, every corrupted tunnel is a testament to their arrogance, a gravestone for the billions of souls they, as a species, sacrificed to their own hubris. They are not masters of the Webway. They are not its inheritors. They are its ghosts. They are refugees forever wandering the haunted, broken, monster-filled ruins of their own glorious fallen home, forced to walk the very corridors that led to their damnation. It is not a path. It is a penance. The Webway in the 41st millennium is a realm defined by its inhabitants. There are the parasites, the Drukhari, who have turned its hidden heart into a fortress of shadow and spite. There are the refugees, the craft-welders, who creep through its shattered, haunted ruins, mourning what they have lost. And then there are the true inheritors, the ones who do not hide and do not mourn, the ones who dance. They are the Harlequins, the servants of the only Aeldari god who survived the fall, not by strength or by sacrifice, but by cunning. They serve Segorak the Great, Harlequin the Laughing God. They belong to no craft-world, no cabal. They are a people of the labyrinth itself. Their place is the Webway, and the Webway is their stage. While their cousins creep and slink, the Harlequins move. They are a riot of impossible, dazzling color in the unending gloom. Their hollow suits shimmer, projecting the images of their greatest myths of heroes and monsters, their every movement a performance, every kill a line in a divine play. They are the only faction in the galaxy that has mastered the broken labyrinth in its entirety. The Drukhari know their dark, hidden sections. The craft-welders know a few precious, safe routes. The Harlequins know everything. They know the Atheltoth, the secret, forgotten paths of the dead that are invisible to all other eyes. They can step from a plaza in Comora to the dome of a craft world, to a demon-haunted, collapsed tunnel, and then to a human hive city, all in the space of a few heartbeats. The Webway is not a ruin to them. It is a map, and they are the only ones who can read it. They are not just performers. They are not just warriors. They are guardians, and they protect the single most dangerous, most valuable secret in the entire galaxy. For deep within the most secret, most inaccessible, most heavily warded nexus of the entire Webway, hidden in a pocket dimension that exists only by the will of their laughing god, lies the Thuvian Gen, the Black Library. It is not a place of light and learning. It is a fortress citadel of silent, black, unliving wraithbone, a place of chilling, absolute silence. It is not a library in the human sense. It is a prison. It is a vault. It contains the galaxy's darkest, most terrible truths. It is the single greatest repository of knowledge on the subject of chaos in existence. Here in its silent, spectral halls are the true names of the most powerful demon princes. Here are the prophecies of the fall written by the farseers who saw it coming and were ignored. Here are the forbidden tomes of sorcery, the lost histories of the old ones, the records of the Emperor's own failed project. The Black Library is the Aeldari's collective shame, their ultimate weapon, and their final desperate hope. The Harlequins are its guardians. They have taken the great, terrible lesson of their fall to heart. It was ignorance and arrogance that damned them. They will not allow the galaxy to be ignorant again. They guard this knowledge, protecting it from the galaxy and protecting the galaxy from it. Only those with the direst need and the strongest will are ever allowed to pass its gates. This grand secret purpose is all part of a plan. A vast, intricate, and utterly incomprehensible performance known only to their master. While the Aeldari pantheon was torn apart, devoured and consumed by the birth scream of Slaanesh, one god escaped. Hegarach, the laughing god, the master of trickery, had seen the end coming. He did not try to fight it. He did not try to stop it. He hid. He laughed, and as he laughed, he retreated into the one place that Slaanesh could not or would not follow. He vanished into the labyrinth. He made the Webway his personal domain, his divine green room. From its shadows he directs his children. The Harlequins are not just guardians. They are actors in the final grand play, a great jest that they believe will one day trick Slaanesh into expending all her power to save the Aeldari, not destroy them. They are the only ones who can walk freely in Comarag, protected by their god's pact. They are the only ones who can bring warning to the craft worlds. They are the only ones who truly understand the stakes. The Webway to them is not a home or a tomb. It is the stage for the final act of the Aeldari, and the fate of the galaxy will be decided by its closing performance. And what of the Imperium of Man, the inheritors of the Emperor's broken dream? They know nothing. The greatest, most profound secret of their civilization, the very purpose for which their god-king sacrificed himself, is a truth so deeply buried it has been erased from history. For 10,000 years they have been utterly, completely, and blissfully ignorant. Deep beneath the Imperial Palace, the portal still exists. It is no longer a construction site. It is a holy sepulchre. It is a place of absolute, cold, terrifying silence, guarded by the grim, golden statues of the Adeptus Custodes, the companions, who stand in eternal, unmoving vigil. They are the guardians of a failure they witnessed firsthand. The portal itself, the great ancient archway, is sealed. It is not sealed with adamantium. It is not welded shut. It is held closed by a constant roaring billion-megawatt storm of pure, golden, furious psychic energy. It is the Emperor's will, a raging, incandescent, eternal no screaming from the golden throne. The portal to the Webway on Terra is not a door. It is a wall, and no one, not even the High Lords, not even the Custodians themselves, can ever open it. To do so would be to unleash the demonic holocaust that their martyred god holds back with every agonizing second of his living death. But the Imperium is vast, and the Adeptus Mechanicus is arrogant. They see the fragments of Aeldari technology. They hear the whispers of a path between worlds. They crave it. They believe that what the Xenos built, they can perfect. In secret light years from the holy gaze of terror, the Project Dark Glass begins. And it fails. It fails catastrophically every single time. The tech priests of Mars are masters of the machine of physics of data. They are children in the realm of the psychic. They do not understand that the Webway is not a tunnel. It is a sub-realm. It is not built of steel. It is grown from thought. And so they try to build their own portals. They forge them from iron and wire them with cogitators. They try to power them not with a harmonized psychic mind, but with the brute force caged screaming energy of a warp drive. They are not building a door to the labyrinth. They are building a high-tech, unstable, demonic summoning circle. Every attempt to breach the Webway fails. Every experiment results in a new, localized, and utterly devastating demonic invasion. Entire Forge worlds have been lost, their populations consumed, their very existence erased from Imperial records by the Inquisition, all in the vain, ignorant pursuit of a technology they cannot even begin to comprehend. And so here is the final grim, dark truth of the 41st millennium. The Imperium is locked out. They are forever denied the one single path to their salvation. The Emperor's grand final solution to the chaos problem is a forgotten, failed experiment, its gateway now the very plug in the dam that holds back hell. Humanity is forced by its own ignorance and by the failure of its God to use the one thing he died trying to save them from. They are forced to use the warp. They are forced to send their ships like the righteous fury, screaming and clawing through the sea of monsters. They are forced to rely on their mutant navigators, on their soul-scoured astropaths. They are forced to feed the Chaos Gods with their own terror, their own rage, their own pain, just to hold their broken, dying empire together for one more agonizing day. They are not just ignorant of the truth. They are living, breathing, dying proof of its failure, but the labyrinth in its 10,000-year stasis of decay and despair is not unchanging. In the 41st millennium, in the darkness of the Cicatrix Maledictum, the Great Rift, a new song has begun. It is not the ancient harmonious song of the Old One's creation. It is not the ecstatic, agonizing scream of Slaanesh's birth. It is a new sound. It is the cold, quiet, final whisper of the dead. For the first time since the fall, the Eldari have created something new, willed into existence by their collective sorrow, by the psychic energy of their final dying breath, and by a desperate, sacrificial ritual. A new god has been born, or perhaps awoken. Inead, the god of death, the whispering god. Its birth was not an explosion. It was an inhalation, the sound of a trillion dead Eldari souls sighing in unison. And this new, cold, quiet power has sent a resonance, a vibration of profound and final stillness through the shattered, screaming corridors of the Webway. And with this nascent god comes a new, dangerous and intoxicating hope. The Inari the Reborn, a new faction that spans all the fractured pieces of the Eldari race. Craftworlder Drukhari and Harlequin alike have rallied to this cold banner. They see a future they had long abandoned. They believe Inead is the true answer, not just a weapon to finally kill Slaanesh, but the key to their lost home. They preach a new prophecy that Inead's power, the supreme, neutral, absolute power of the end, can do what 10,000 years of warfare and sorrow could not. They believe it can cleanse the labyrinth. They envision a new psychic fire, the cold, pure, blue-white fire of the grave sweeping through the corrupted tunnels. A fire that does not burn living wraithbone, but burns demonic essence. A cleansing, scouring flame that can cauterize the bleeding, gaping wounds of the fall, that can seal the rifts to the immaterium, and that can annihilate utterly and forever the demonic legions that have made the Webway their nest. They dream of a new, clean, restored Webway, a home they can finally, truly reclaim. But this is the 41st millennium, And there are no simple solutions, no clean victories. This hope is a terrible, double-edged, grimdark gamble. Is Inead truly a savior, or is it just another catastrophe in a new, colder cloak, a different kind of apocalypse? What is this cleansing fire? Is it a surgeon's scalpel, precise and knowing, or is it a raging, indiscriminate inferno, a spiritual wildfire that consumes all in its path? What happens to Comarag, the Dark City, which is itself a vast, parasitic, unholy kingdom built inside the Webway? Will this purification ignite the Shadow City, exterminating the trillions of Drukhari, one of the last great vestiges of the Aeldari race? And what of the Black Library, that fortress of shadows, that vault of terrible necessary knowledge, protected by the laughing god himself? Will Inead's cold fire recognize it as an ally, or just another dark thing to be scoured clean from the labyrinth? The Aeldari are poised to make one final desperate move, to save their ancestral home by potentially destroying it and all who remain within completely. The final act of the Aeldari play has begun, and its stage, as always, is the broken, haunted labyrinth. The story of the 41st millennium is not one of glory. It is one of echoes. It is a story of a future that died, and the grim, desperate, unending present that was born from its corpse. At the heart of that failure, at the very pivot of this galactic tragedy, lies the labyrinth, the Webway. And to understand it, we must banish the lie that it was ever just about travel. We must see it for what it truly was, for what it was always meant to be. It was from its very inception the galaxy's final desperate gamble for salvation. It was not a tool, it was the answer. It was the solution to the great, existential, unwinnable war, the war between the material and the immaterial, between the soulless cold of physics and the screaming, ravenous madness of the soul. It was conceived in an apocalypse. The old ones, the ancient forgotten gardeners of life, built it not as a monument, but as a bunker. They built it to escape the two great predators they had unleashed upon existence, the cold, mechanical, star-eating death of the Citan in real space, and the hot, psychic, soul-eating birth of the first demons in the warp. It was their third way, their secret road, their sanctuary where life could continue, shielded from the two forms of oblivion they had engineered. It was a dream of survival, a dream they bequeathed to their inheritors, the Aeldari. And for millions of years the Aeldari lived that dream. They turned the sanctuary into a paradise. They expanded the labyrinth, perfected it, and made it their home, a testament to their effortless, arrogant, and total mastery of the galaxy. It was their private heaven, a realm of light and song, a symbol of their perfect, unchallenged supremacy. It was their greatest achievement. And then it was the engine of their fall. Finally, that same dream, that same desperate hope, was seen again for the last time by the rising power of mankind. The Emperor, in his cold, calculating, inhuman foresight, saw it all. He saw the trap of the warp. He saw the damnation inherent in his own species' psychic destiny. And he found the key. He did not seek the Webway for conquest. He sought it as the cradle for his species' ascension. His City of Light was not just a fortress. It was a womb, a protected, sterile, safe dimension where humanity could be reborn psychic and perfect forever, cut off from the parasitic, ruinous gods that fed on their souls. It was a plan to win the game by simply finally walking off the board. It failed. It failed everyone. It failed spectacularly, tragically, and completely. It was a dream too perfect for a galaxy of such profound, self-destructive flaws. The old ones, its architects, were devoured. Their great work left a hollow, unfinished skeleton. The Aeldari, its inheritors, were too arrogant, too decadent, too perfect. They did not see the rot in their own souls, and they used their paradise, their instantaneous network of gratification, as a high-speed vector for the very spiritual plague that would birth their own destroyer. They poisoned their own sanctuary, staining its walls with a psychic filth that, when their end came, caused their home to shatter, to break, to bleed demons. The Webway failed the Eldari, becoming the haunted, broken ruin of their empire. And it failed humanity. It failed in a single desperate, well-intentioned, and utterly catastrophic moment of filial folly. Magnus's desperate warning, his arrogant, forbidden intrusion did not just break a shield. It murdered a future. It killed the dream. The dream of a mankind free from the warp, the dream of a species ascended, the dream of an emperor who was a guide, not a god. All of it died in a secret underground war, leaving only a locked door, a broken throne, and a galaxy condemned to an eternity of hellish, desperate survival. The labyrinth failed everyone. And so, what is it now? What is the legacy of this grand failed solution? It is not a highway. It is not a path. It is a monument. It is the galaxy's largest, most complex, most dangerous haunted house. It is a graveyard of broken dreams, a sprawling dimensional tomb, its corridors echoing with the ghosts of 3 separate fallen ages. To the Drukhari, the galaxy's most depraved parasites, it is the perfect shadow. It is a dark, tangled, unknowable fortress from which they can bleed the universe dry, their dark city a parasitic cancer growing in the labyrinth's hidden folds. It is their shield, their pantry, and their hunting ground. To the craft world Eldari, it is a penance. It is a constant, bitter reminder of their arrogance, a network of broken, dangerous, ghost-filled ruins they are forced to creep through, refugees in their own fallen kingdom. To the Harlequins, it is a stage, a map of secret passages that holds the key to their god's final, desperate jest. And to the Imperium of man, it is nothing. It is a forgotten, failed idea. It is a myth. It is a terrifying sealed door on Terra, a door their god-king holds shut with his own screaming, dying soul. It is the ultimate symbol of their stolen future, a future of light and reason that was traded in an instant for the grim, dark present of blood, ignorance, and faith. We end where we began. The Gellerfeld screams, the righteous fury, its lights flickering, its crew weeping in terror, its navigator bleeding from his third cursed eye, plunges through the roiling, incandescent madness of the warp. Claws the size of forgotten continents scrape against the hull. Laughter echoes in the marrow of the bone. But this time our view is different. We are not just watching a scene of horror. We are watching a consequence. We are watching the epitaph of a failed dream. They are forced to take this road, this path of damnation. They are condemned to this hellish, unreliable, soul-destroying journey. They are trapped in the prison of the immaterium, their every prayer, their every scream of terror feeding the very monsters that hunt them. And they are trapped here, all of them, for one simple, agonizing reason. Because the only other path, the clean, safe, golden road to paradise, is now and forever a broken, haunted, dark, and screaming ruin. A labyrinth that is perhaps even worse than the hell they have been forced to embrace.